I wanted to welcome you all to the Live Better, the Jason Beck Show. I'm your host, Jason Beck. And on the next few episodes, we're going to get into the tiny house movement. And I wanted to welcome you to part one. Welcome to my daddy's channel, the Live Better, the Jason Beck Show. Enjoy. So, when you think tiny house, y'all probably have seen them all around. You probably have seen YouTube videos. You have probably seen articles on them. A tiny house that you pull with a trailer, much different, similar to an RV, but a little bit different. So it actually looks like a house. A tiny homes could be one that you pull or one that you build on your property as well too. And basically, the tiny house movement has been catching on to a lot of people. And kind of the reason why a lot of people are shifting to the tiny homes is because they're just tired of the headaches and the upkeep that comes with a traditional house. And not to say a lot of and expenses as well too. Your energy bills also as well can play a factor if you live in an HOA. When you have your HOA fees, so that also plays a huge, you know, in the decision making of switching to a tiny home, and not to consider the traditional costs that come with a home too. You have the cost of the home and a lot of the costs that I just mentioned also too, and then a big thing about living in a tiny home is about living a simple life. Basically, you have less things, you know, because you're forced into that. No, I wouldn't say forced into that. I mean, if you're not used to living a simple life, then I would say you might want to gradually set yourself up for that. Start living a simple life. Get rid of stuff you don't need. So that way, when it comes time for you to actually move into a tiny home, you won't be like, why do I have all this stuff? And then I have to get rid of a bunch of stuff and choose what I want to keep or not to keep. You know, I see a lot of people in their life and they're just hoarding stuff, collecting stuff that is so unnecessary. And it just keeps on piling up and up and up, and it's just like, well, they definitely couldn't live in a tiny home. But I tell you what, if you had to move hoarders into a tiny home, oh, they'd have to adjust real quickly. They'd have to get rid of almost all their stuff. You know, some of the let's take a look at some of the benefits of living in a tiny home. You use less energy, obviously. It's a smaller home. So when you use less energy, it decreases your energy bills. You're thinking that's fine and dandy and that's great. And you're probably thinking, well, what's the catch or what are the pitfalls that may go into living in a tiny home or trying to get into a tiny home? And some of those pitfalls are zoning laws and rules and regulations that you have to, building codes and all that you have to, you know, get around. Also, if you're building a tiny house on your property or want to find property to build a tiny home, or if it's mobile, then you've got to find a tiny home community, maybe renting land, or where you can put your tiny house. So you definitely want to check into your county's regulations and stuff where you want to move to, and you may have to move it over to the next county if you're looking for something a little more flexibility. I want to buy land and put my tiny home, regardless if you can move it. So you definitely want to do your homework there. Also, financing and insurance can be a challenge. Now, there are some out there that do finance, a lot of bigger corporations that are starting to build tiny homes that are, financing and have insurance available for tiny home living. And we talked about zoning property. You need to have property. You need to have something somewhere where you're going to put your tiny home all on. And plus, we talked about the zoning laws and regulations and everything like that. So, question is, who is moving into these tiny homes? That's probably what you're thinking. Like, well, maybe you've never thought about that, or maybe this might plant a seed or something that you may, or just provide information of who is actually moving into tiny homes, who's the predominant ones that seem to be moving in. Well, you have young individuals, and kind of the thing about young individuals is, if they haven't moved out on their own yet, and they're wanting to buy a house or wanting to rent an apartment, they might go the route of a tiny home. Because in a lot of different cities and a lot of different places, having a tiny house or building your own tiny home is going to be a lot less money versus having to go rent an apartment or, get a traditional house. Also, couples with no kids could be a great option, and a lot that are, that have no kids, couples are actually, you know, prime candidate for wanting to move into a tiny house. They want to live a simpler life. They don't have any kids. They don't have to worry about that. Um, Also, people that are about to enter retirement. So if you're thinking about retiring, maybe you might want to just look at you know either building a tiny house on a property and downsizing your expenses, how much stuff that you have. You know, of course, if you're building on a property, you can always build like a storage facility to put your other stuff as well too. Because one thing when you retire, you got to take in the fact that you have a very strict budget. You don't have that income that you would be getting normally from work. You're either going to live on Social Security or plus whatever you have in your 401k, or if you have built any multiple streams of income, that would be part of your income as well too, if you have built in any. So those are the prime candidates. Let's review them once again. You got your young individuals, your couples with no kids, and people entering retirement. But let's take a look at who sparked the movement of the tiny house movement. He goes by Jay Schaefer. In 1999, he built the first tiny home on a trailer. So you can imagine that piqued a lot of people's interest. Wow. It did for me, piqued my interest, and a lot of other people. I'm like, I'm going to buy a home, but I don't want to buy a traditional house. I'll just buy a tiny home. It's just me and my little fur baby. And from that interest, the movement actually started, the mainstream movement started in 2014. Also, in 2014, the show The Tiny House Nation also started as well too. So you had the movement started, plus you have a show, and guess what? On YouTube, you have YouTubers that have their tiny house channel as well too. There's one that goes around with his wife, and they travel and they go to different people's tiny homes. They film them and talk to them and stuff. and they get to showcase their tiny home and show it off to, to everybody on YouTube, and social media and stuff, so, this is taking a huge leap from, when the interest was there to a huge movement. You even have, there are places where you can live or rent out or rent property from, that are a tiny house community. So they are out there. It's just a matter of researching your area, if you can find a place, tiny house community to put your tiny home, or find the right area that has, the matching zoning laws that'll allow you to put a tiny home on the property. So, definitely something to think about there. Um, I know that's definitely something that I talked to one of my sisters about, because all four of us, we own property that we got from our mother, and that was one of the things that one of me and my sisters talked about. We already have land, why not use it, keep it in the family, and put a tiny house there if possible. Of course, we'd have to check the zoning laws. I'd be all for it. Why would I go buy land when I, own part of the land where I can put a tiny house on, or a small little house, with a couple rooms, more energy efficient, or instead of buying a mobile home, buying a tiny house that I can put that you can put there permanently also too, and cut down on expenses, but have enough room in the tiny house to where, you could have multiple people staying there if needed, within the family and guests and stuff. So, I'm definitely all for this, the tiny house movement myself. That's definitely one of my goals one day, is getting a tiny house. So we will continue tomorrow with part 2 of the tiny house movement. We will take a look at kind of like the cost for a tiny house. The costs range from if you built a tiny home or versus you buy a prefabricated one, and we're going to talk about that as well too, and the cost of buying a traditional house also as well too. So thank you so much for tuning in.